I'm Darryl Kaplan. I'm the editor of Trot magazine. We're at Queen's Park today, and we're going to be interviewing Kathleen Wynne, the Premier of Ontario, and John Snoblin, who headed up the panel in charge of horse racing in Ontario. We're going to be trying to ask them questions today about slot machines, about modernization, about the effect that the horse racing industry, the decisions made by the Ontario government have had on the horse racing industry, and see what we can get today. Premier Wynne, thank you very much for being on Standard Bird Canada and speaking to us through Trot magazine. We're here today because you've offered to give us some of your time to talk about industries issues that are very important to the horse racing industry. We've received a lot of questions from readers and people in the horse racing industry, people interested in the horse racing industry. The first question that I want to ask you is, you've talked about integration between horse racing and the Ontario Lottery Gaming Corporation. Have you specifically directed the OLG to tie a percentage of some form of gaming revenue from a particular game or slot machines to horse racing?
So I haven't made that direction, except that I've said that I want the horse racing and gaming industry province-wide to be integrated. And I know that as part of the panel report, there were some suggestions of products and things that could be used to generate revenue for horse racing. So to the extent that we can identify those and develop those, I think that that's a good idea.
Okay. I think one of the concerns from the horse racing industry has been that there have recently been announcements that slot machines will continue to operate at racetracks. The one part of the partnership that doesn't exist anymore is that relationship between the horse racing industry and the actual slot revenues. Is there a business plan, or is there something in terms of your discussions with the OLG in terms of going forward, something that they've given you to tell you, here's how we expect integration to look, here's what we expect it to be like, here are some guidelines we have going forward, or some direction that you've given them up to this point?
So what we've done is we've made that direction clear, that integration needs to happen, and we've put $400 million into the sector over the next 5 years at the recommendation of the panel. We've said that there will be other products and other ways of generating revenue. So at this point, I'm handing the torch to the experts. You know, John Snoblin and Elmer Buchanan really are the people now that the horse racing industry needs to work with, and they will work with OLG to make sure that we get this right. I think there's a huge opportunity for horse racing in Ontario. I think we can, take our place in the international field, but it does mean that we have to work together to come up with different models. And my experience has been so far that people are quite enthusiastic, that they are stepping up and they want to see this to be a success.
Okay, and you feel that the OLG is I guess when I was talking to Rod Phillips several months ago, it was very new to them. Have you found that they understand it more? They're starting to understand what.
Well, I think that they are getting used to the idea. That had not been the instruction previously. That had not been the direction, and so now they have that direction. Now they know that that is the expectation. That's why we have a new chair at OLG, and so there's no doubt in anyone's mind that this has to happen. I understand that there may be some bumps along the road as the organization gets used to the idea, but this is the direction we're going, and we will get there.
There was a motion from the opposition parties about returning to slots at racetracks, an amended version of slots at racetracks that dealt with some of the concerns that were there. I guess that was passed by the opposition parties. Based on the comments that we've received, I would have to ask you the question: what about that concept of returning to slots at racetracks program, but fixing it, but solving any issues that were outstanding?
Well, we're intent on fixing the industry and making sure that that we put the tools in the hands of the industry to fix itself, which is really more to the point. The slots at racetrack program was not sustainable. It wasn't accountable. There wasn't enough transparency, and a number of reports had said that, but the panel made that very clear. So I think what we've done is we've moved past that. I was surprised when the opposition came up with that suggestion. At the last minute in a very ad hoc way. I don't think that would be the responsible way to go. And I believe now the partnership plan that we've got in place is the right way to go. There's been a lot of work that's gone into it and an enormous amount of consultation, you know. John Snobelin and Elmer Buchanan and John Wilkinson talked to hundreds of people around the province about how to get this back on track. And so that's the plan that we're going to follow.
In terms of confidence then of the industry, there certainly is funding, and there's certainly a government commitment, and there's talk about sustainability. What the horse people don't see is that direct connection yet between the OLG and so what would you say to them? What would you say to the industry in terms of them having confidence? Because it is really a confidence issue. You make a decision to breed a horse, now you're talking about multiple years, even beyond the period that you're speaking of. So what would you say to them about them, should they have confidence in this existing?
So I want people to understand that I am very committed to making this work. And since I've been in this office, I've done everything I could to move us forward. The initial decision that was made, I will be the first to say, was not made with enough thoughtfulness. There wasn't enough background. People didn't have enough information. And so we have moved beyond that. And so my message would be, please work with us. You know, work with each other and work with us, because we have good people who know the industry and want to make this work. And they know, John Snobelin and Elmer Buchanan know that they have my support. They know that I am going to work with them, and if there are issues that need to be dealt with, then we will deal with them. But we've got money on the table. We've got, we've got a regime that I think can work, and so I need the sector now to work with us.
Okay. So there have also been some announcements from the OLG about committing to gaming zones at racetracks. We saw some more announcements come out today in terms of Flamborough and Mohawk and Woodbine. Those agreements are with the racetracks, so slots will continue to churn. And I understand that there's also some talk in those agreements about horse racing. Can you maybe clarify a little bit what that new modernization looks like now that it includes horse racing at these specific sites, and what direction the OLG has been given about the integration at individual sites?
So I think that's a level of detail that really the folks who are on the front line need to speak to. I mean, what I have said to OLG and to John and to Elmer is that we need to make this work. We need to find ways for this to be sustainable, because it's not good enough to me, not good enough for me that we just have the next 5 years, you know. And when you said beyond the 5 years, that's what I want. I want an industry that's going to grow. I think that horse racing is a very important aspect of the culture of rural Ontario. You know, I think that rural and small town Ontario has demonstrated over decades that horse racing is a part of who they are. So I don't want us to see that industry die. And so I want it to be sustainable, but the actual agreements and the actual mechanisms, that's what we need the sector to work with our experts on.
Okay, so that actually brings me more to, you talk about communities and you talk about small towns, and a lot of the people out there are concerned about their regions, whether they be from Windsor or from Sarnia or from Sudbury. They're concerned about the regions that aren't mentioned in the plan. We know that
as the alliance or the
yeah. Though, and I think what they want to hear from you is what commitment you have to rural Ontario, to outside of the core of racing. Yeah. What commitment you have, sort of from a high level.
Well, again, I've been clear that I see this as an opportunity for all of those tracks. You know, I think there are opportunities to come up with different models, to come up with business plans, and I know that in some of those smaller communities there are groups coming together and they are coming up with ideas. And again, we need them to work with John and with Elmer, because and I said this in my initial briefing when the panel brought their report forward, that I want us to be able to work with all of those tracks if there are unique opportunities.
Okay, and that is discussion or direction that you have between you and the panel in terms of making these locations a priority as well as the larger locations?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there have to be business plans in place. You know, there has to be a viable opportunity, but I really believe that there's a lot of creativity in the sector, and so we want to tap into that.
Okay, and in your experiences with the horse people out in these regions, and the feedback they've given you, Do you feel that there is a viable horse racing industry in some of these smaller locations? Do you believe that it can happen?
I do. I think it will be different. You know, I think that I've said all along that the horse racing industry in Ontario is going to be smaller, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a viable future for some of the smaller communities.
And when you say smaller, I guess that goes back to a sort of a question about viability. We talk about what sustainability will look like, what viability will look like. Do you have any idea how much smaller it could be? I mean, I guess this is more a detail question, but it's certainly a concern from people out there that when you talk about a smaller but sustainable, what do you mean when you say that?
I don't think we know that yet. You know, I don't think we know exactly where this is going to land. Even the experts, I'm not sure they know exactly where it's going to land. I think it's going to depend on the imagination and the creativity of the folks in the communities. It's going to depend on what we can put together in terms of the integration and what the overall gaming plan is going to look like. But I think that there has to be a willingness to work together. There has to be a willingness to come up with ideas that will suit the particular community, because that's the other thing. Each community is not the same. So even outside those core tracks, the communities are not identical, and they have different histories and they have different needs. So I think it's going to take this transition period to actually know what's going to land.
Okay. Now, a question, sort of another side of it that, of course, is front of mind is the breeding side of the game. The point, of course, is if you have a strong horse racing industry, but the horses aren't being bred here, the investment's not coming here. It's actually Ontarians investing elsewhere to bring horses to race here. It's something in terms of what's in the plan and what's been talked about that really concerns breeders who are closing up shop, who have fewer horses. How would you respond to them?
Well, I think the best thing that we can do is to put the industry on a sustainable track so that the breeders have an industry to work with. You know, if there's no horse racing industry, then there's going to be no breeding industry. So their fates are intertwined, obviously. And so I want the breeders to know that we want to work with them. And I know that there are some concerns that have been brought forward. We will work with them. But I also want them to know that my intention is that we will have a sustainable industry that they'll be able to breed for.
To the point of breeding and to investment, again, we received a lot of contact from people in the United States, people in Australia and New Zealand saying, I used to invest $1 million in Ontario and I'm not investing now. I think it's been answered in the past as to whether this was thought of before the decisions were made, and I think to some degree this was not thought of. I guess since that announcement, the initial Slots of Racetrack announcement, and now, what part of that has been thought about and looked at, and what would be your thought in terms of, again, a message to the foreign investors who invest in Ontario?
So I'm going to let John speak to the details of that, but let me just say that I believe that in the initial decision, there was no thought about the whole industry, and by that I mean the supply chain, you know, every aspect of the industry. So what we have tried to do is we've tried to take into account with the new plan all parts of the industry, and that I think is that's the difference between the initial decision and now. But I'm going to let John speak to the details of the foreign issue.
We'll catch John on that.
Okay, great.
For sure. So we talked about investment and we talked about the breeding side of it, and just make sure that I catch my the one point that as well is raised is one thing that happened going back a decade is that essentially the horse racing was funded through wagering, and then the government got more involved into gaming, and in many ways the government became competitors with horse racing for that gaming dollar. That's sort of part of the reason that the Slots at Racetrack partnership worked, because it was, yes, we're going to put slot machines in, but we're going to make sure that there's a revenue share. I guess now, as there's modernization and there's more gaming, we're talking about online gaming, the province is really getting involved. And then you have on the other side, you have this 250-year history of horse racing. And how do you balance that with continuing on new forms of gaming and not competing with horse racing?
Well, you know, what I see is a partnership. You know, I don't see the two in opposition to each other. I see a partnership that will evolve over the next couple of years. And again, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like 2 years from now, but what I do know is that there will be much more, there will be a much better understanding of how horse racing fits into gaming in the province now, in 2 years than there is now.
Yes. We're getting very close. Okay, no problem. There was one other thing, or a couple other things I can think of. One is there was an Auditor General's report as we understood regarding the OLG. I don't know, has there been anything that's come from that, or has that not come out yet?
I don't have any specifics on that at this point. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well then, you know, just to wrap up, because we're being asked to wrap up. Sorry. No problem. I would just. Again, I think the point in terms of tying revenue directly to horse racing is probably the real key thing that hurts everybody. It's just, it used to be tied. It used to be, we could see if X amount of dollars are wagered on slot machines in our facilities, how is that going to come back to us? And I guess if you could just leave a message to people as you direct OLG, as you speak with the panel, how we can get back to something where people have that confidence again, and is there a way of tying the two in together, like some of the more successful jurisdictions around the world?
So I hear the concern about predictability. I understand that is a concern. You know, it's why we're implementing the plan that the panel brought forward. It's why I went to my colleagues and said, look, we need $400 million over the next 5 years so that there can be some stability in the industry. And so we're going to work with the industry. John and Elmer are going to work with the industry to bring that stability. And as I said, I have their back on this. You know, I want this industry to thrive.
Okay. Premier Wynne, thank you very much. Really do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.